Hello, in this video I'd like to talk about policies to reduce unemployment. There are two main strategies for reducing unemployment. The first is to increase aggregate demand to reduce demand-deficient unemployment. So for example, in a recession, you've got negative growth and firms of course lay off workers, and this can cause a rapid rise in unemployment. And so the solution to this type of unemployment is to try to increase aggregate demand and increase economic growth. So the two main policies are monetary and fiscal policy. So the central bank in a recession will tend to cut interest rates to try to stimulate consumer spending and investment. So when interest rates are lower, it should be cheaper to borrow and more incentive to spend rather than save. So in theory, lower interest rates should boost spending, increase aggregate demand, and lead to higher economic growth. And if successful, and we do get higher growth, then firms will be producing more and so will tend to take on more workers. And this is how we can reduce unemployment. In practice, it doesn't always work because 2008, 2009, interest rates were cut to pretty much close to zero. But the economy was very sluggish. People didn't respond to the interest rate cut because banks were still unwilling to lend and confidence was very low. So in this case, the central bank actually pursued quantitative easing as well to try and increase the money supply and reduce the interest rate on bonds. As an alternative to monetary policy, the government could pursue fiscal policy, which is, in this case, tax cuts and higher government spending. The aim being to, again, increase aggregate demand and try to stimulate economic growth. Now, the main problem with expansionary fiscal policy is that governments have a limit to how much they can borrow. Because if they are already in high debt, like many European countries, and they wish to cut taxes and increase spending, then markets may not be willing to lend them sufficient funds. Certainly in the case of the Eurozone, like Italy and Greece, they have a big unemployment problem, but actually have been pressured to cut spending rather than increase government spending. So in theory, expansionary fiscal policy can help increase aggregate demand and increase economic growth. And in a recession, certainly economists like Keynes advocated this as a good policy to reduce unemployment. Now, that's demand-side policies. Then you've got all the different supply-side policies. And these seek to overcome the labour market imperfections to try to reduce frictional, structural, real wage unemployment. And the aim of these supply-side policies is not so much to boost the demand, but to deal with the individual problem as to why people can't find a job. So for example, if you have an unemployed coal miner used to do manual labour, unable to find a new job, the government could increase spending on education and training to try to offer training schemes to help give the unemployed a better chance of finding jobs, say, in the growing service sector. And in theory, this can reduce structural unemployment. Although in practice, of course, it might be difficult for a 50-year-old coal miner to suddenly retrain as an IT expert. So there's definitely practical difficulties to this, and at the least will take quite a long time to have an effect. Some people feel that unemployment is often caused by benefits being too generous, which kind of reduces the incentive for an employer to get a job. If this is the case, the government could cut unemployment benefits and also make it much more difficult to get them. In a country like Germany, where benefits are quite generous, this policy may be partially successful in reducing unemployment. I think in the case of the UK, benefits are already fairly low compared to wages, and also it's already quite strict to get benefits, so I'm not sure whether it would be effective in the UK. Another policy, if we look at, say, Spain and Italy with high unemployment, one of their big problems is they become uncompetitive. So you may need supply-side policies to try to increase the competitiveness of the labour market. So maybe lower tax rates on labour, reduce power trade unions, and greater labour market flexibility make it easier to hire and fire workers. And if you can reduce wage costs, then you might be able to encourage firms to take on more workers. And perhaps in the case of Spain, what they really need is something like a devaluation to restore competitiveness. But because in a euro they can't do that, so they would have to rely on supply side policies such as making labour markets more flexible. But again, there's a disadvantage to labour market flexibility. It may cause a rise in temporary employment and increase job insecurity. In addition to the policies mentioned, there are a few others. The government could try to provide better information about job availability. The government could consider giving subsidies for firms to take on the long-term unemployed. This might be problematic because firms may just switch from getting rid of their current workers to take on the cheaper long-term unemployed. And a final policy to reduce unemployment could be to reduce minimum wages, which again brings wages lower down and may encourage firms to take on more workers. So to summarise, in a recession, the government and central bank need to work on increasing aggregate demand to get the economy out of a recession and so that the economy creates more jobs. In the long term, you also need to look at all the different supply side policies you can implement to help make labour markets as flexible as you can and help to overcome the occupational and structural immobilities. Okay, thanks a lot.